I'm going to try and talk to you about supporting those who are bereaved. When we think of bereavement, we tend to think of those who have lost a loved one. And yes, this is usually the case, but also be aware that sometimes people can grieve for other things. For instance, a loss of job, or maybe a plan for the future, or a child that now cannot be, or even their self-esteem. I know what grief is like personally, as well as trying to help others in their grief process. I've lost my grandparents, my father, and in 2017, my husband. Nonetheless, my experience of grief will be different from others. There is no set way to grieve. We are all different. Bereavement or grief is different for everyone. We are all individuals and are affected in different ways. But there are some common principles involved in helping those who are bereaved. When a person is bereaved, particularly when they've lost a loved one, they go through all sorts of emotions. Understanding what these are is the key to helping them. Common emotions are shock, especially when sudden death. Time stands still and you want everything else to stop, but it doesn't. An inability to perform simple tasks. You become numb, everything is overwhelming. It's difficult to make phone calls. With me, it was just before Christmas, and the thought of writing Christmas cards was just too much. My cousin helped a lot, and she wrote a little insert for me to put in the cards. And she used to encourage me, and she even printed out the addresses and bought the stamps. And then I know one day I did 12 cards, and I told her I'd done 12, and she told me how well I had done. I mean, I look back now, and that's pathetic, but that's where I was. So be aware that people are in that place. Guilt, that's another emotion that people have. They think of things that they could have done, they should have done, they sometimes blame themselves. There's such a whole realm of guilt that people pile on themselves. Isolation, people feel isolated, things they've perhaps done together with the other person are now perhaps taken away from them, and they just feel on their own. They feel nobody understands them. Just be aware of that. And anger, do be aware that anger is such a thing as well. Anger is all part of grief. It can be over big and little things. I know I used to sometimes feel angry with people, and sometimes I remember my son, he said that he was angry with an old man once who walked across the road in front of his car, and he said, he was just angry and thinking, why is he alive and not his dad? Silly little things, but they do get angry over little things. And loss. It's just not just loss of the person that you've lost, but you can lose your identity as well, because part of your identity might be in that person. And when they've gone, you can feel like they've lost everything. And fear. Just be aware that people can become fearful that bad things are going to happen. They just need reassurance. Be aware that they're going through all these emotions and at any time may snap at you. Forgive them. Don't take it personally. It's all part of the grieving process. So how can we help those who are grieving? Try and be sensitive. Don't try and fix it. You can't. Only God can do that. If you know the person well, you'll have more understanding of their needs, but we can all play a part. In the first instance, send a card. It doesn't have to say much, just that you were thinking of them at this time. It means a lot. If you do put in a scripture verse, write it out. Don't just put verse and text. That's an effort to look up, and the person may not be at that point. I remember when my husband first died, I was in shock and everything was an effort. So to keep having to look things up wasn't helpful. Also be careful what you quote. Try and put something uplifting. I personally felt God reassuring me he would never leave me nor forsake me. So references to that helped a lot. But sadly, although well meant, some have the opposite effect. For instance, I think the one that upset me the most at the time was a card I received with reference Psalm 146, verse 9, which I had to look up. And it said, "The Lord watches over the alien and sustains the fatherless and the widow, but he frustrates the ways of the wicked." I can look at that verse now and get insurance from it, but at that time it just made me upset and angry. I wasn't ready to call myself a widow. I hadn't expected or accepted his death, and to me at the time it just seemed to be rubbing it in. I didn't need someone to tell me I was now a widow. I knew that. So be sensitive to what you write. Keep it simple. Ask God for wisdom. He knows the person a whole lot better than you do. At the same time, don't ignore them. I know it's hard to know what to say, but even I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. It's better than nothing. I remember my first time this happened to me. I knew that sometimes this sometimes happens and that people don't know how to speak to you. But although I thought I was prepared for it, I still found it difficult when I found people avoiding me because they didn't know what to say. If you can find the time to listen, do. They may repeat themselves. They may want to talk about how their loved one died. Don't shut them up. Just listen. It's all part of the healing process. Help them to remember the good things and the good memories. Help them just to talk about their loved one. It really does help. Remember, cliches don't help. As Christians, we can be bad at this. Things like "he's in a better place" aren't helpful. It doesn't help the fact that you miss them and want them here. It just makes you feel selfish. Likewise, I found when I was told things will never be the same and how awful it is, unhelpful. I knew that. I didn't need reminding of it. But what I did find helpful was encouragement like, with the help of your family, friends, church, and God, you will get through this. This gave me the reassurance that I could carry on. Let them know it's okay to grieve and to cry. As Christians, I've come across some who think we shouldn't be upset as they're now in heaven, but that doesn't take away the loss and the pain that we feel. We know that Abram in Genesis 23, verse 1, grieved and wept over Sarah. It says Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abram went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Give people permission to grieve and not pretend everything is okay. Remember, it's okay not to be okay. If it's appropriate, offer practical help. There's a lot to do both immediately and subsequently. As I said before, my cousin, I'd have been lost without her. She helped me with all the paperwork and so many other things. If you can help, do. Food is always good to take. It's not because maybe somebody needs it, maybe they do, but you don't feel like cooking, and also you may not feel like eating, but if someone's made it for you, it makes you think, oh, I must eat it because they've gone to the trouble of cooking for me. So that's always a good one. Different things are needed for different people. For me, reading material help because I'm a reader, but I'm aware that wouldn't be appropriate for everyone. Understand if even after a few years they might not feel they can do some things. Don't judge them if they let you down. Be aware that many draw closer to God when they grieve, but sadly some turn away from Him. So try and encourage them. So what's needed? First of all, communication. So often the leadership doesn't get to hear about people's needs until sometime after the event. Please, if you hear of someone who is bereaved, let the leadership know so it can be brought to the attention of the relevant people. Be aware that different cultures have different expectations. Arrange to take food around. Maybe create a rota for a few days, at least till after the funeral. Visit or make a phone call if appropriate. But remember, this may not be appropriate for the first few days as they are coming to terms to their loss. Be sensitive. If they don't pick up a phone message, Leave a message and tell them you'll ring again. And when that's okay, and it's okay if they don't want to feel like answering, give them their space, but don't withdraw from them. Sometimes just a little text simply saying, thinking of you is sufficient. Send cards, even just a note. They are important. No need to be sloppy. Just let them know how much you valued the person they have lost if you knew them, and maybe something you remember about them. And probably more important, affirm them that they did what they could for their loved ones. If you put a scripture verse in, pray first, make sure it's relevant, and write it out. Don't just put chapter and verse. Pray for them and let them know you are praying. There's a lot to do when someone dies. See if there's any practical help you can do. There is so much paperwork, it can be bewildering. Just because that person is usually a competent person, don't assume they don't need help now. Even small things can be daunting, like shopping, or maybe things they did together, or this time of year, the garden, the grass cutting. Be specific with invitations. Don't just say, ring me sometimes. Chances are they won't. You set up a time and a place if you are meeting up, or you make the phone call. Don't feel let down if they say at the last minute they can't make it. If you don't know how they're feeling, you just don't know how they are. But also, likewise, if you do commit yourself to a certain time and date, don't change it unless it's really, really need to have to, because that could be important for that person. Encourage them that they can do this and reaffirm God's promise that He will never leave them. Remember anniversaries if you know them. They can be hard times. Also remember in subsequent years, as although time has gone and they seem to be coping, there will still be a sadness there. Don't assume just because they say they are fine that they are. Most of us don't like sharing our feelings if they're negative. Encourage them to open up, even if they're angry. If they are angry, it's all part of grief. Remember, we all have to go through sorrow and loss in life. We need to know how to go through it. We don't go over or under grief. We have to go through it. And how long that journey is different for everybody. Don't rush it. I would also like to add to anyone who is listening who might be grieving themselves. Be kind to yourself. Don't rush things. Grief is messy. It's not a straight path. It's okay to cry. Don't be afraid to ask for help and talk to someone. And above all, remember, God is always with you. He'll never leave you.